Hello and welcome to another episode of Spaghetti Westerns podcast. This is season 4, episode 15, number 100. Unbelievable, 100. Today we're going to talk about the history of the spaghetti westerns, and the film of the week will both be The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Going to talk a little bit about who are those guys with Enzo Petito. He was the gun shop owner in this film. Also, whatever became of Aldo Joffrey. He played Captain Clinton. And we'll have a book of the week, autograph of the week, and the CD of the week in the weekly news. This week I'm going to be joined by C. Courtney Joyner, and possibly Jay Jennings will join us, but he's feeling under the weather a bit, so he's going to be behind the scenes. But I've told him if he wants to chime in during the broadcast, please do so. So let's get started. The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. I'm not going to get into a lot of detail on the story since 99% of you have seen this film and 98% have seen it multiple times. But the Italian title was Il Buono, Il Brutto, Il Cattivo. Also is called Il Due Magnifici Stronziano. Spanish title was El Bueno, El Feo y El Meo. German title was Zwei Glorreiche Halunken. UK title was The Magnificent Rogues. I don't know if that was a DVD or video title. I doubt if they released it in the theaters under that title. And of course, the USA title was The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. It's a 66 Italian, Spanish, West German co-production. PEA out of Rome, Arturo Gonzalez Producciones Cinematográficas out of Madrid, Constantin Film out of Munich, produced by Alberto Grimaldi. Of course, the director was Sergio Leone. Screenplay was by Age, A-G-E. It's actually Agenore Incroci. Scarpelli, who's Furio Scarpelli. Sergio Leone, Luciano Finzanzoni, and Sergio Donati. English dialogue was by Mickey Knox. Cinematography was by the great Tonino Delacoli. It's in Technicolor and Technoscope. Music was by Ennio Morricone, and the song in the film is The Story of a Soldier by I Cantori Moderni. That's Alessandroni's singing group. Running time is 180 minutes, although there's extended versions, shortened versions, but the average time length shown is 180 minutes. That's 3 hours. The main cast consists of Clint Eastwood in the role of Blondie. Eli Wallach played Tuco Benedicto Pacifico Juan Maria Ramirez, a.k.o. the Rat. Lee Van Cleef played Sentenza or Angel Eyes. Some other names you'll recognize was Captain Clinton, played by Aldo Joffrey, who we'll cover a little bit later. Mario Brega played Corporal Wallace. Antonio Casas played Stevens, the rancher or farm owner in the beginning. His wife was played by Cello Alonso, and his youngest son was played by Antonio Ruiz, who we saw in For a Few Dollars More. Livio Lorenzen played Baker, the guy that sent Angel Eyes on his mission to find out about what was going on with the stolen treasure. Rada Rasimov, who we've covered before, played Maria. Luigi Pistilli played Padre Pablo Ramirez, that's Tuco's brother. Lorenzo Robledo is in it as one of Lee's henchmen, known as Clem. Al Mullock was in the beginning, played Elam. And we have Antonio Molina Rojo, who's almost indistinguishable as Captain Harper in the Betterville prison camp. We also have Benito Stefanelli and Aldo Sambrell as henchmen for Angel Eyes. Bounty hunters in the beginning of the film were Frank Brana and Saturnino Serra. Ricardo Palacios shows up as a barman in a missing scene. And we have, who else do I have in here that I wanted to mention? I guess that's it. Anyways, the way this film came about was almost by accident, but after the success of For a Few Dollars More, executives at the United Artists approached the film's screenwriter, Luciano Vincenzoni, at the premiere of For a Few Dollars More, and they were blown away. They asked him to sign a contract for the rights to his next film, and they asked him what it was going to be. And on the spur of the moment, uh, Alberto Grimaldi and Sergio Leone had no plans, but with their blessing, Vincenzoni pitched an idea about a film about three rogues who are looking for some treasure at the time of the American Civil War. The studio agreed, but wanted to know the cost for this next film. At the same time, Grimaldi was trying to broker his own deal, but Vincenzoni's idea was more lucrative. The two men struck an agreement with United for $1 million budget, with the studio advancing $500,000 up front and 50% of the box office takings outside of Italy. Total budget was eventually $1.2 million. Now, the story goes, like I said, you've all seen this film before, but it's about a bounty hunter played by Eastwood, a Mexican bandit played by Eli Wallach, and a hired gun played by Lee Van Cleef, who go in search of a treasure of $200,000. I'm going to get into some of the cut scenes to fill in the time gap of 180 minutes to 4 hours or whatever. But there's also the Socorro scene, which is while searching for Blondie, Tuco extorts money from a small town in Confederate-held territory with his rival Blondie, hatching a successful plot to steal back the money for himself with the aid of a prostitute. Then there's the chicken scene where Tuco recruits three henchmen to assassinate Blondie now that he has located him. He spouts loud and long about friendship and his offer to share his money stolen from the gun shop. We have a scene in the desert called the Animal Skeleton. It's amongst the scenes of Tuco leading a dehydrated Blondie through the desert. An additional scene was completed but ultimately discarded where Blondie collapses and slides into an animal skeleton partially buried in the sand.
Tom,
I
Tom,
guess it's
Tom,
supposed.
Tom.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Introduce your guest while I'm producing here.
Yes, sir. Oh, there's my guest.
There I am.
See Courtney Joyner. Courtney, feel free to
Good.
chime in on any of this stuff I've gone over. We'll get to you when I get done with this, and then we'll talk about the scene, the film in general. But anything to add so far?
Well, Tom, as we get through with the cut scenes, I'm very curious about your own feelings about the various reconstructions of The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Because as we know, there's always this kind of, I think, interpretation that when scenes are removed from the movie, that this was somehow studio interference, et cetera, rather than, in fact, the wishes of the filmmakers themselves.
Right. Much like Sam Peckinpah, always complaining the producers cut up his
Pat
film.
Garrett and Billy the Kid being the
exactly
great
Wild
example.
Bunch. Yep.
Yeah. And I think Leone himself, a number, because the Tuco scenes that have been discovered and were reinserted in, I guess, maybe perhaps the last or the previous to the last incarnation on Blu-ray, extend the desert sequence, I think, beyond what Leone had intended.
I agree.
And that cut was one that he had made himself.
Right. I think this Socorro scene where Tuco's trying to raise funds, it could stay or it could go. I mean, the problem is, what does it add to the film? And it really doesn't add anything. If you've seen cut pictures of Clint in bed with the prostitutes, you may wonder where that came from. Or Tuco standing on a stage spouting and holding this guy upside down trying to get money out of him. But it really adds nothing to the overall plot or the movie itself. They're just scenes that maybe Sergio made, and then they were discarded on the cutting room floor by Sergio himself.
And no, I agree. And in fact, it really feels, to me, that the character that suffered from any of these trims is Lee Van Cleef.
Yeah. Yep. Now the chicken scene, I see a little bit of importance there because all of a sudden you see these three guys in a hotel going down a hallway to shoot Clint. And my question, well, where'd these guys come from? You know, Tuco's been a lone bandit all this time. How did he find these three guys? Were they members of a band that he hung around with? And this whole scene sort of explains that. He goes to find them to recruit them to assassinate Clint.
And well, and also too, that's the presence of, if you will, the stock company, so that we, because he always wanted to bring in Aldo Sombrero, for example,
Right.
and there you're right, it does, like, suddenly it's like they're transported into the middle of the movie, and
Hmm.
there's no identity for the characters at all, except we recognize these actors.
Right. And then the animal skeleton scene in the desert. I mean, that adds nothing to the film other than to show the desolation that Clint's being forced to walk through. Animals have died in the desert. You know, that he's really going to be suffering through this walk. So that all it does is enforce that.
And
But then we've got another scene, the Confederate hospital scene, where Angel Eye stops at a Confederate hospital. Really, it's a blown up mission in the ruins of a church to find out where Bill Carson, if captured, would be sent for imprisonment. Angel Eyes shakes his head as he scans the conditions of the men in the hospital. Even Angel Eyes shows compassion for the shoulders. I feel that's a bit of a scene that could be incorporated into the film because, again, how does Angel Eyes show up in Bettersville? He's just there in the normal movie, but how did he end up there? Now he know that Blondie and Bill Carson, who's actually Eli, would show up there.
no, I agree. And the thing is, with kind of the cutting and the excision of these scenes with Lee Van Cleef, one of the things I've always felt that the film kind of lost a little bit was Angel Eye's identity as a military officer.
Yep.
And when we end up in the prison camp and all that wonderful stuff, it's like, oh, okay, now, but I mean, that's a lot of threads to put together.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. All of a sudden, there's Angel Eyes. Well,
Yep,
how'd this happen? Of all the prison camps, they end up in the one with Angel Eyes, you know.
exactly.
Yeah, I agree with you. Then there's also the scene in the desert where Blondie on his trek across, and I've seen this one inserted, like you said, in the last or next to last edition. Blondie's uh, crossing the desert and he rolls down the dune and he looks up and he sees the top of a boot. So he grabs it thinking he's going to tip over Tuco, and the boot is empty. Right next to the empty boot is Tuco taking a foot bath, pouring water over his feet. And there's poor Blondie, thirsting for a drink of water. So it doesn't really add anything to the scene. It just shows the desperation of Clint and the enjoyment of Tuco torturing him.
Yes, and of course, Eli Wallach is so much fun, but he gets, I would say, just so much screen time. Also because we also have all the sequences in the mission with his brother.
Right.
So we ultimately know more about Tuco than anyone else in the film.
Yeah, yeah. There's no background on Clint whatsoever. I mean, we know
Right.
him from the other two films, and that's how we know who Clint Eastwood is. Yeah. He's
That's
just
right.
a bounty hunter. Yep.
And there's always been, I think, that kind of confusion that there is supposed to be, other than the fact that Eastwood is in all three movies and everything else, but this idea that he is actually playing the same person in all three films is wrong, because he's
Right.
not.
Right. Right. Then we have this scene, and this is another one. It can come or go, but it explains a little bit when Lee Van Cleef teams up with Eastwood at the prison camp. He takes this band of men and they go in search of the cemetery. And while stopped at a riverbank on the way to Sad Hill, Angel Eyes explains to Blondie how he came to be involved in the search for the missing Confederate gold that the film's plot is centered around. Um, One of the other scenes in that, and let me find it here, is six is the perfect number. And that scene is Blondie and Lee Van Cleef are camping for the night by the riverbank, and Blondie shoots one of Angel's Eye's henchmen when he sneaks up on them in the middle of the night. Angel Eyes asks the rest of his men to come out of hiding. When the 5 men come out, Blondie counts them, including Angel Eyes, and concludes that 6 is the perfect number, implying 1 for each bullet in his gun. That's another one of those dark humor scenes that Sergio loves to throw in there. But it does explain how Clint ends up with Angel Eyes and these other horsemen when they ride into the exploded town.
And I agree. I think that that is a scene that should in fact be there, and because it does carry all this additional information behind it. And it was always again, I think Leone was getting such delight out of what Eli Wallach was doing that he did lean towards his character and those scenes. And if Clint could be trimmed or Lee Van Cleef could be trimmed, he did it.
He did it for, yeah, to let the Tuco scenes remain. Yep.
Yep.
Then we have, after they go to the mission and they leave, they're riding in the carriage, and all of a sudden they come across this battlefield where a battle has just taken place, and they see the remains of the dead soldiers, dead horses, and that's again where Blondie has some compassion about a waste of men. And again, it ties in the Civil War a little bit more, where we've almost forgotten about the Civil War with just the truck of these 3 guys trying to find the searcher. It tries to bring in the Civil War, and it really shows some compassion of Clint being a normal human being and not just this bounty hunter.
Oh, that scene where he gives the dying kid a few puffs on the cigar is my favorite scene in the movie.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. And then when we get to the cemetery, we see the cannon scene, and this one I've never seen. I've just read about when Tuco rides away from Clint, leaves him there. Clint finds the cannon and lights it, and the cannon shell explodes at Tuco's feet. Well, there apparently was a scene where Tuco finds a cannon and fires back at Clint, or attempts to, and the cannon falls apart. You know, again, there's a Tuco scene that I can see Sergio say, well, we got to put Tuco in a scene shooting back, you know, but they cut that scene out. And I got a feeling that Sergio said enough's enough. We'll just leave that scene out.
Yeah, I think finding 2 cannons
Yeah,
might be,
yeah.
yes, a bit
Right.
much.
Yeah, one of the other scenes I missed before, when they're going to the mission after Tuco has marched Clint through the desert, they stop, and there's a sentry scene where they're stopped, and this old guy comes out and wants to know who they are and blah blah blah. And Tuco knows that his brother is stationed at this mission, but he doesn't know really where the mission is. So he stops to find out, and the sentry tells him, "Well, it's so many miles down the road, blah blah blah," and he wants to know how he knows there. And he says, "My brother's is leader of the missionaries mission, so they sent him on his way." That can be kept or not kept, because if Tuco knows his brother and he knows he's at this missionary, he's just taken for granted that he knows where the mission is. So it's just, again, more some humor thrown in by Sergio.
And well, you
And
know what?
basically what I've got for the missing scenes. Is anything else you remember that you could throw in?
That's of course, again, it's for me personally, it's always been acquiring yet another edition of The Good, the Bad, the Ugly to see what has been discovered and what has been reinserted, which has become this, you know, the never-ending restoration, I guess.
Yeah. Well, one thing about Leone, and I mean, once you fell in love with Sergio Leone, The Good, the Bad, the Ugly could be 5 hours long, and you're not going to sit there going, "My God, is this film ever going to end?" You just keep saying to yourself, "More, more, more." You know, so if all these scenes were preserved and set in place, and there's 4 hours now instead of 3 hours, I don't think too many people would complain. You
No.
know, maybe the girlfriend or the wives, because they were taken to
Yes.
see the movie, but you and I wouldn't say, "No, that's too long," or "Why'd they put this back in?" Anyway, some of the trivia I've got is the bridge was blown up twice, for those of you who don't know, and I don't think there's too many. But Once the Spanish military had built the bridge across the river, Sergio was so happy with the construction, he told the captain in charge of the soldiers, he was going to give him the honor of pushing the plunger when he said via to blow up the bridge. Via meant go in Italian. So when one of the crew members yelled to the other people, the cameraman or whatever, via, telling them the rest of the crew it's time to go, the captain thought that was his signal and he pushed the plunger and blew up the bridge. Unfortunately, not a camera was rolling and the shot was lost. The captain was so upset with himself and Leone's disgust, he promised to have the bridge rebuilt in 2 weeks. The second time was a success. But for you who don't know that, yeah, the bridge was blown up twice.
Oh, well, actually, I can add to that story. Via
Okay.
Gray Fredrickson, it was actually blown up 3 times.
Oh, wow.
Okay, Gray was in Italy. He was a production coordinator, and of course ended up producing The Godfather Part 2 and Apocalypse Now and all of this. And he was representing United Artists in the American Money. And originally part of the plan for The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly was that they wanted to Leone wanted to shoot a scene in the United States like he would with
Once upon a
Once
time
Upon
in
a
the
Time in
West.
the West.
Yep.
Exactly. And so the military blows up the bridge the first time.
Hmm.
The second time, they got construction demolition guys to do it. And it was such a huge explosion
Oh,
that
too much.
unfortunately Lee Van Cleef had just ordered himself a new Mercedes.
Oh, that's right. I have heard this. Yes, go ahead.
Yes, and they delivered it on the set. The bridge blows up, and it pushed a 2x4 or 4x4 right through one of the doors of the car through to the other side, completely
Oh,
destroying it.
oh,
Van Cleef standing, he had literally owned the thing for about 15 minutes.
oh.
And
Can you
so
imagine?
that was destroyed, and finally they brought in the movie techs and everybody else. And as you said, it took weeks in between because of course the
Yeah.
bridge had to be rebuilt. But that cost of that sequence is what eliminated any chance that the company had of coming to the United States and shooting the scene that
Yeah,
Leone wanted to shoot.
really. Yeah, I
Yep.
could see him going to Monument Valley and blowing up one of the mittens,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
by
they said,
accident. Yeah, right.
forget it. This is
Yeah.
not going to happen. But interestingly for Gray, when he got back to the United States, he had already met Albert Ruddy, and Ruddy had asked him to partner with him over at Paramount. He's moving into his house, and Clint Eastwood shows up, and they were
Hmm.
good friends. And Eastwood's like literally, moving boxes of books and and things and helping out. And he sits down on the couch and he offers Gray the basically the presidency of Mount Paso, which he was trying to then to put together.
Gotcha.
And he had just gotten his contract for Where Eagles Dare. He said, they are paying me a lot of money for this, so I think we can really set this up. And United Artists loves us and all this. And he said, but this is the thing, while we set it up, you won't be drawing a salary till we find a home for the
Right.
studio. And Gray was newly married, they had a baby on the way, and he had told him, I've already signed this thing with Al Ruddy at Paramount, which of course would lead to The Godfather. And so there we go. He missed out on his
Oh,
opportunity, although he and Clint remained good
well,
friends. And later on,
at
Gray
the
recommended
time, yeah,
Unforgiven to him.
at the time, you got to make those decisions. You don't know what the future is going to bring, or
Absolutely.
but yeah,
Yep.
that's too bad. Anyways, another thing at the bridge, and there's supposedly when the Tuco and Clint are out in the water putting the dynamite on the bridge, you can see a car in the background drive by. Now, you must have to see this on the big screen because I've never seen this happen on a small TV screen or whatever. And I've seen the movie multiple times. I do see the car in the for a few dollars more scene on the train driving by in the background, but not on the bridge scene. The other one on this scene here was when they went to blow up the bridge. Clint and Eli came back to dive in his foxhole, and Clint thought it was too close to the bridge, so he asked Sergio, "Well, where are you going to be?" And Sergio's pointed to the top of this hill behind him, and Clint said, "Well, this is too close for me." So they had doubles take their place, and that's why their heads are down first of all, and all you see is their backside. But there's a big piece of, like, I think what you said, uh, Courtney, is a 4x4 comes right by his head and hits a sandbag right below where the camera is. So you can see how dangerous that would be. If it had been over 2 feet, it would have hit the double right in the head. So this is quite a missing scene that, or not a missing scene, but why Clint decided not to be in that scene himself. The
Well,
other
of course,
one, go ahead.
well, no, Tom, I was going to say, Wallach, Eli has told the story many times of just how incredibly dangerous, and you see it, it looks wonderful on the screen when he has the chains cut from his wrist by the
Yeah,
passing
I got that
train.
coming up in a sec. Yeah, right.
Oh, okay, good. Yes,
I got, yeah.
I'll shut up. Yeah.
What the other one talks what Courtney's talking about is Eli was almost beheaded when he filmed the scene when the train cuts the chain binding him and Corporal Wallace. You can see his head next to the wheels on the moving train. Sergio wasn't satisfied with the first take and told Eli to raise his head on the second take so the camera could better capture his face. Eli refused, and you can see in the scene he would have been decapitated if he had followed Leone's instructions because the step onto the back of one of the cars just misses his head. That's what you're talking about, right?
Yes, sir, it sure is.
Yep. And then another one in the cemetery was when they dig up the Carson grave. Remember, Carson isn't buried there. They open it up, and there's a skeleton in the Sad Hill scene when they open Art Stanton's grave. This was a real skeleton and was a deceased Spanish actress who wrote in her will she wanted to act even after her death. And what had happened was they used a fake skeleton, but again, Sergio didn't look like it. It looked too fake. So someone knew about this skeleton for rental in Madrid, and they went and got it. And I'm sure that there's no credits on this because they don't want to make public who this person actually was, because there probably could be some real problems in using a real skeleton, even in a Spanish film. And then we have another trivia question that probably some people have heard of before. But while Tuco's in the graveyard waiting for them to dig up the grave and take the sacks out and preparing that scene where he opens the sacks with a shovel, he was sitting there and he saw this bottle of lemon lime drink that he had just fell in love with. It's an Italian drink. So he grabbed it and took a sip out of it, and it burned his lips. So he stopped drinking it and found out that it wasn't lemon lime at all, that the crew had put acid in there to pour on the bags to make them open up easier when he hit them with the shovel. So
Oh my
again,
gosh.
Eli almost gets killed twice during the filming of the movie. Unbelievable, huh? But that's the
Wow.
way they did things. Yeah. The other thing that amazed me in the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and I've only found one soldier in that entire film that's ever come forward and said took part in that filming. I was stationed in wherever the town was nearby or the military camp, and we made the graves, we built the bridge or whatever. You'd think after all these years that would be a little flower in their cap saying I was part of that, you know. But I've only seen one guy, and he has pictures taken with him of Clint and Eli and Lee during the battle scene, you know. But that's amazed me that no one has come forward after all these years and said I was part of that. Maybe they were sworn to secrecy that they weren't supposed to be being, you know, making these things during military time, you know.
And
But the other thing I wanted to bring out was the soundtrack, because the soundtrack by Ennio Morricone has become iconic. Its main theme is heard in many commercials to this day, with the Ecstasy of Gold theme, where Tuco runs around Sad Hill looking for Bill Carson's grave, has almost superseded the main theme. The Hugo Montenegro cover version hit #1 on April 6, 1968. That's 2 weeks after the film is released, and it remained #1 for 14 weeks. That's over 3 months it was #1 on Billboard's chart. That's unbelievable to think today how popular that song was.
and that was
So,
actually, I think, the first quote unquote adult LP. It wasn't, Johnny Quest and 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea that I ever purchased. And it had that black crayon drawing
yeah,
on the cover. Yes. And boy, it sure wore out the needle on my portable record player. That is for sure.
Yep. You don't see too many TV commercials for westerns, but you see western. I think there's for Modelo um, beer. They used the Ecstasy of Gold theme in there, and that's almost taken the place of the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. But anything western reference, they didn't use they don't didn't use the Magnificent Seven anymore. Everything was the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly theme, which you recognized right off the bat. That's where it came from. Yep.
I wonder
Um,
if one of the things with the Magnificent Seven themes, talking about advertising, is that it became so associated with cigarettes.
yeah, Marlboro Man. Yep.
With the Marlboro Man, exactly. I wonder if it's like, no, if people hear that, of course,
Oh,
many would still think of the Marlboro Man rather than the John Sturges movie.
sure, sure. Good point. Good point. Well, I thought I would have Court and I get involved in a little bit of discussion about the movie. When did you see The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly in relationship to the other two? Did you see it first?
I believe I did see Good, the Bad, the Ugly, and of course, my first exposure to it was on ABC Sunday
Mm,
night at the movies. I mean, that was a big deal when they would run that film, and ABC also, of course, was linked into United Artists at that time, so the Bond movies and all of that. So I think it absolutely was the good, excuse me, Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Then. Uh, for a few dollars more. And I think Fistful of Dollars actually was the last one
was the last.
that I
Yep.
saw. And then, fortunately, in the early 70s, UA, remember, did that Spend the Night with Clint Eastwood.
Hmm.
So, first theatrical experience was the drive in with the Three Leones and Hang 'em High.
Yeah, I was just going to say, yeah, I saw them because I'm much older than you. I saw them in order. So when for Fistful of Dollars came out, I saw it because of the advertising, and I thought I was going to go see a comedy. Not because it was supposed to be a
Oh, my
comic
God.
film, but an Italian-made Western to me just blew me away. But the advertising of, this is the most dangerous man who ever lived, blah, 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 blah. It's the first motion picture of its kind. It won't be the last. I'm going, how in the hell do they know? This is, it's going to be a bomb and they're never going to make another one. And I've told this to Jay and I've told it on here a bunch of times. I was so blown away by the music and that movie. When I got up, I turned around to count the people. And in those days, movies opened on Wednesday, not Friday. So it was the middle of the week. There were 10, 12 people in that theater. And then 6 months later, because this came out in 66, for a few dollars more came out. I went to see it in Granada Hills, and the theater was half filled. And about 3 months later, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly came out after that. And they were lined up around the block like Star Wars when I went to see that one. That's how popular these movies became. But I saw them in order. And again, like you, when the first one came out, no soundtrack available. We had to do Leroy Holmes. And then I found Hugo Montenegro, and he had all three soundtracks on there. So now I knew why they knew there was going to be follow ups to it. But I was just blown away by the first one, and had it whenever the second one came out. I was there on opening night, and then the third one, the same thing. I had to go for opening night because these things just they for me. You see people that said, "Oh, I saw this movie and changed my life." That Fistful of Dollars actually did that for me. It changed my whole view on watching films, and that was my first taste of any, um, European westerns. I had seen, I guess, a couple things on TV that came out in '64 and were on TV in '65, '66 but I didn't recognize them as spaghetti westerns. They were just, I thought they were Mexican westerns, or didn't even watch them at all. But then, like you said, they started to show up at drive-ins, and they would show all three plus Hang 'em High, and you would go to the drive-in at 8 o'clock at night and be there 6 o'clock in the morning. And if you were still there, they gave
Absolutely.
you free donuts and coffee.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And when we put this into the historical context, and I think that because of the lag time between production and release, there is still very often this perception of 67, 68. These were the movies that came out and the Wild Bunch was coming and everything else. It's like, no, Fistful of Dollars was made at the time period of AC Lyle's westerns at Paramount
Right,
and
right.
Cheyenne
Marty
Autumn
Murphy.
and things like
Yeah.
that. Yeah, this was,
Yep.
1964, and the Western landscape was really so different. So they were making a truly radical departure when they made this movie.
Yeah, when I first saw it, I thought, oh, when he goes to the well in the very beginning, I'm going, oh no, this is a Mexican Western, or it was filmed in Mexico. Well, Spain and Mexico, they have the same architecture and style, so that's why it looked like that. But I thought, oh no, Mexican movie. And then I watched it, and it kept getting a little bit better. I mean, gruesome when he rides into town. There's a hangman's noose there on the tree, and then he passes a dead man that says "Adios, Gringo." You know, I go, holy crap! And then when he walks down to shoot the Baxter men, and he says, "Get 3 coffins ready," and then he walks back. Oh, my mistake. 4 coffins. That
For
was. This black humor is fantastic. I mean, this guy gets it. I got to watch this whole film, and it just kept getting better and better.
well,
But yeah,
as Tom, as we go into these things, we find out these little bits, especially with the international filmmaking community. And again, because Fistful of Dollars was made for such little money, and of course, then there was the problem with Toho and the lawsuit and all
hmm
the rest of that mess uh, for Yojimbo. But I've always loved the fact that when they went to go shoot, they found the Western town that had been built for the Sheriff of Fractured Jaw, the Raoul Walsh movie starring Jane Mansfield. And so here it is. They've left it. Let's use it. And what's wonderful about that, I actually like the Sheriff of Fractured Jaw quite well. But what's wonderful is it was designed by Bernard Robinson, Hammer Films, great art director. So when you're
hmm
looking at Fistful of Dollars, you go, oh my God, this is the same art director as The Curse of Frankenstein and Horror of Dracula. Yes.
Yep.
So
Yep. Well, the
it's
fact that they used
the
real
international
buildings,
dots get connected.
yeah, the fact that he used actual buildings. So when you look out a window, you're not seeing a a drawing or an artist mat outside the window like you do in a TV Western or a lot of American Westerns. That was the scene that you saw at the window. That was real. Those were real
Yep.
trees. That was another building in the distance. It wasn't a fake set. Now they did film stuff in a set, but most of the time they didn't show out a window or a doorway. Those were real towns, and those people running around there, the villagers were real Spaniards living in that village that they used as extras. The For a few dollars more, when Clint rides into the town at the end, and they said, "We've never seen you shoot right into Agua Verde and show us, Agua Fria, whatever." Those are real citizens of that town, and the reason they're dressed in black was there was a funeral that week. So all the women were dressed in black and mourning, so that's why they fit perfectly with the scenario of them riding into this town. But that blew me away later too, that Sergio actually used real towns. You can still go see them today. They've changed some, but they're still there.
Absolutely.
They're not Western sets like in Paramount or Columbia or whatever. Those were real places. But yeah, that's great. So what do you were there any influences on for the dollar films for you, especially the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, compared to other westerns or what we've already talked about?
Well, I think that even still, I mean, Leone's style, whether it was, you go to other filmmakers who were making Euro westerns at the time, it had so much impact. And, essentially a lot of people wanted to try and make films in a similar fashion. And some people said, well, of course, Sergio Corbucci had gotten there first and what have you. But there was a lot of just impact generally with these Italian filmmakers. But I think that you look at that movie today, and not only, of course, the impact of it because it was so popular, but also the Technoscope photography is so stunning.
hmm
And it is, and a lot, I think Technoscope itself has a little bit of, an odd history because, of course, it was favored by these European production companies because it was cheap.
Right.
And they didn't have to go through, again, putting these things into historical context, they didn't have to go through the whole deal of the cinemascope lenses you had to rent from 20th Century Fox and all of these other extraordinary expenses that were often associated with widescreen process. and Technoscope was its own thing with a limited, space on the celluloid, and because it did multiple images in the same celluloid area, it meant that the actual footage of the prints was shorter, and so they were cheaper to manufacture,
Hmm.
which is why it became the favored process for Euro westerns. And Tom, I think it's just wonderful because when you talk about the budget on Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, that was a tremendous boost in money for what they were going
Hmm.
to spend compared to what was it on Fistful of Dollars, like $185,000 or
Yeah.
something.
Yep.
And so, again, it's like historically we're looking at what they were able to do with pennies and created this. And then by the time of The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, they had literally not only had they created this wonderful film series, but they had created this style and this approach to westerns, which affected absolutely the entire genre across the board for such a long time, including something like The Virginian, which then shifted over to The
Hmm.
Men from Shiloh. And,
Yep.
Morricone even did a theme for the
Yep.
new incarnation of The Virginian. So
Right.
the impact was just amazing. And, there are still people today, historians, looking at the Euro Westerns generally, and they argue with the fact about their classification because Native American characters are almost never represented. And also, because of the presence of the Civil War, some argue, well, then they're not really Westerns because the
Yeah.
push to the West didn't happen until after 1865. So I just love that there's still controversy about these just grand entertainments.
Yeah. I always consider if it's about the Civil War, it's not a Western.
Yep,
But if
you
if
hear
the
that all
if
the
the
time.
if the Civil War is a fringe part of like this movie, then it's a Western because they're not concerned about the Civil War. It just happens to take place and they go in and out of it. But if you didn't have the Civil War and these were just three guys looking for a treasure, it'd be a Western.
Yeah,
But for me, some of the things that Sergio created or the spaghetti westerns created, first of all, bounty hunter. Bounty hunter was always looked at as a villain in American westerns. That was the scum of the earth. Oh, you're a bounty hunter going after men for money. This became that was a way of life back then. The other thing is a poncho. A poncho was worn basically by Mexicans. If you were an American gunman or a cowboy wearing a poncho, I mean, you were like bottom of the barrel. You poor, you know. And he rides a mule. Remember in Fistful of Dollars, they says, "My mule." A mule again was looked upon as bottom of the barrel. You don't ride a mule unless that's the only thing. The only thing below a mule would be a burro. That type of stuff. But the 3 day growth of beard, most of the time in American westerns, are all shaven, or if they start off with a beard, quickly they shave it off sometime during the film, so they've got clean face. Um, Most of them are clean dressed. You don't see dirty guys. They ride into towns and they're all painted. You don't see towns like you do in the Sergio Leone westerns where they're basically made out of clapboard and material that they could find easily. They were all prim and proper white washed buildings with nice signs. Never saw horse droppings in the street like you do in spaghetti westerns. Um, Also, the black humor, the dialogue, little dialogue, more action. And of course, I got involved with a lot of them just because the music was so different than the American westerns. By the American westerns, they had big symphonic orchestras and big themes, and the Italian westerns had small orchestras, guitar, trumpets, and whistling. And that just got me the camera angles, the close-ups that Leone did. Those to me were all things that weren't done in the American Western that caught on, and still to this day, the anti-hero for a long time became the American hero. And again, the beards, the 3 day growth, they were grubby. They didn't care about whatever people thought about them. They were themselves, and that's how the hero in American films took over. The spaghetti western actors or heroes took over the American films. Anything
Yeah,
else?
there was no a man's got to do what a man's got to do kind of that cliche, which I love. And as you
Unless
said,
there's a dollar, unless there's a dollar value in it.
that's right. And but Ian, Tom, it's just like what I was saying. What you just emphasized is so many of these artistic choices were in fact dictated by the fact that they had no money.
Yeah, exactly.
And then it just became part of the style and the presentation, which is just wonderful. And also too with bounty hunters, is in the West, bounty hunters were railroad employees.
Yeah,
And it's interesting that that never is really ever touched upon in the Leone films.
right,
That
right.
that's where they got their money. And in a and as that became more and more of a character, what you tended to see was you know whoever it was going to be, Robert Widmark, for example, bringing somebody in on his shoulders and dumping him on the desk of the sheriff and saying,
Yeah,
"Okay, pay me," and that wasn't the way it worked at all.
right, right. Yeah, they were discouraged and looked down upon. You bet.
Absolutely.
Even if you got somebody like a Widmark, even though he was still treated the same way, even though he was the star of the movie, was like, oh boy, this guy.
Well,
Anyways,
actually,
I'm going to get in. Go ahead.
I was just trying to think who now. What was his Italian name? Because when I watched when I was very young, I saw they had advertised Robert Widmark in a movie. I'm like, gosh,
Oh, that's
what
Alberto
is?
Dell'Acqua.
Thank you very
Yeah,
much. And I was like waiting for Dick Widmark to show up. I'm like, who is
yeah.
this?
That's another thing that we should do sometime is go through all the American names that are close to American actors, like Robert Widmark. I mean, it's supposed to be Richard Widmark to the audience that see the poster, right? It's got to be his brother. And then
Exactly.
say who the Italian and Spanish actors really are, because they use these Americanized names and they tried to pick up on American names
And of
or
course,
well-known names.
the first release of Fistful of Dollars, of course, they Americanized Sergio Leone.
Yep, yep. Well, all of them. I mean, Dan
Yep,
Savio was Morricone. They all had American name. And then when it became popular, all the posters were revised, and you saw Sergio Leone
that's it.
instead of Bob Robertson,
Bob
and
Robertson.
Ennio
Yep.
Morricone, yeah, all that kind of stuff. Anyways, I'm going to go through just the actors' bios. We've only got one here because Blondie was played by Clint Eastwood, who was Clinton Eastwood Jr., born in 31. Thankfully, he's still with us. But we've covered him in his own episode, number 37. Uh, Sentenza or Angel Eyes was Lee Van Cleef, played by Clarence Lee Van Cleef Jr., born in 25, died in 89. He's covered in his own episode, number 25. You've heard that Clint is supposedly the one that gave him the name Angel Eyes?
No, I
No,
am
that was
not.
one of the rumors I've heard. I never knew where that came from because I've never heard Clint say, "Yeah, I gave him that." But apparently, it meant that's the last thing you're going to see when you see, or the next thing you're going to see once you see Lee Van Cleef show up. You're going to see Angel's Eyes, and they just gave it to him instead of that Sentenza. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's where that came from. The other one I'm going to talk about for a minute is Eli Wallach, and Eli played Tuco, but he was born in Red Hook, Brooklyn, New York, on December 7th, 1915, which means, Court, he was 50 years old, 51 years old when they did The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. I mean, he doesn't look it, he sure doesn't act it,
Nope.
but he was 51 years old. He was a film, TV, and theater actor, later life, mostly theater. Although he frequently returned to the stage, Wallach was better known for his films. He appeared in over 170 films and TV appearances from 51 to 14. It was the Western that made Wallach famous. The Magnificent Seven, How the West Was Won. He was considered one of America's greatest character actors. He received an honorary Academy Award for Lifetime Achievement in 2010 He was married to actress Ann Jackson, who was born in 25 and died in 2016. He was married to her from 48 to 14. He is the father of 3 children, and he died in Manhattan, New York on June 24th, 2014. Now, in my opinion, Eli should have won or at least been nominated for an Academy Award for his appearance as Tuco in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. As you say, whether Sergio dominated the film by giving Sergio, I mean not Sergio, but Tuco, the great parts or not. I mean, he stole the film. If you think about The Good, the Bad, the Ugly, the first thing you think of, this is Eli Wallach's film, not Clint's or Van Cleef's film. Van Cleef's film was for a few dollars more. But I mean, his acting in this is unbelievable, and it's not like not too much Tuco. I mean, I enjoyed every minute that Tuco's on stage. Man, he's just fantastic. And why he was ignored, I guess, because it was an Italian Western. That must have been it.
No, I agree, and of course Wallach. He had, it's kind of established, certainly for westerns, as a Mexican bandito.
Yes.
And so, sure, that's what, when the idea came up, they weren't thinking about Eli Kazan or the Misfits.
Mm-hmm.
They were thinking about the Magnificent Seven and how the West was won. And I'm sure, too, that Leone, and who, of course, was a great student of film anyway, were all thinking, okay, we have basically 2 stoics. We need somebody who is going to cut loose. And the casting could not have been more perfect in contrast to Van Cleef and Eastwood.
Yep. They've talked about Henry Silva being that role, but he'd been too stoic.
Yeah.
But you're right. Eli just cut loose, and Sergio was probably egging him on the whole time, more and more and more. So now I want to get into Whatever Became of, and that's another actor in the film, Aldo Joffre. Yeah, Aldo Joffre. He was born in Naples, Campania, Italy on April 10th, 1924. He had 2 sisters and a brother. One was actor Carlo Joffre, born in 28, died in 18. Aldo began his career as a radio announcer before the age of 20 and announced the end of World War II in 1945 on RAI Radio. He started acting on stage in 1942 with the Eduardo De Filippo Company and worked on stage with Luciano Visconti and Giorgio Strehler. He had a long apprenticeship that allowed him to experience himself as an actor in various expressive styles, developing a great versatility. His film debut was in 1947 in A Santa Spina, directed by Mario Mattoli. He also appeared in Ieri Oggi Domani, directed by Vittorio De Sica, also the dramatic comedy Yesterday, Today, and Tomorrow in 1963 with Sophia Loren, and Ghosts Italian Style 67, and When Women Had Tails in 1970. He is best remembered for his role as Captain Clinton in Sergio Leone's The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly in 1966. His last film appearance was in 2001's La Repubblica di San Gennaro, directed by Massimo Costa. In the late 1960s, he devoted most of his acting skills to television. Joffre also appeared in the Euro-Western Two Mafia Men in the Far West in 1964 as a defense attorney in the Franco and Ciccio film. In all, he appeared in over 90 films between 1948 and 2001. Aldo also worked as a voice dubber, and he is the Italian voice of Charles Bronson in Guns for San Sebastian in '68, and Mario Adorf in Johnny Holliday's The Specialist, and Luis Davila in 1970's Modulo, my favorite film. Later in life, he became a writer, poet, and novelist. He was married 3 times. His first marriage is unknown, but his second was to actress Liana Trouche, 1938 to 1981. That's when she lived. And she died in a traffic accident at the age of 42. They had a daughter, Jessica Joffre. Aldo then married Elena Pranzo Zaccaria, who is still living as of 2017. Joffre died in Rome on June 26, 2010, during an operation for peritonitis in San Filippo Neri Hospital in Rome. He was 86. So again, he's one of these guys that pops up in the film. He's almost comic relief as the drunken captain. And again, you see an anti-war theme there where he wants to get these guys away from this bridge and save his troops, but he's commanded to blow up or take the bridge. And basically take the bridge. It's Tuco and Blondie who devise to blow up the bridge for them to get across the river and get on to Sad Hill Cemetery, but also to uh, bring to fruition the dream of Captain Clinton to make all these soldiers go away. And they blow up the bridge, and this is his last scene. He hears the bridge is blown up, and he passes away on the operating table. So that's Aldo Joffre. Have anything to say about him and his role in the film, Court?
Well, I love it. I love his part in this movie, and again, it as the film progresses, and it's these side characters interacting with Eastwood and Lee Van Cleef, like such as in the hospital scene, that bring the movie its heart. And just like the sequences with, as we said, with Tuco and his brother, I mean, those are tragic scenes.
Yep.
And you see that his family has rejected him, and you're a loser, and we don't want anything more to do with you, and all of that. And it's just, it's terrible, and but beautifully acted. But you know, we feel Tuco's tragedy. But you know, Tom, you always too. When we look at international productions, of course, your own expertise. One of the things I always find fascinating is there was no real, if you will, hierarchy among actors and filmmakers. Everybody in the Italian film community knew everybody else.
Yep.
So you literally could be doing a movie with Visconti or Sophia Loren, and then 2 weeks later you're doing a movie with Mario Bava and or Lucio Fulci. I mean, there was no demarcation point because everybody was social with everybody else. And so I find that it wasn't like, and certainly at this time, like in the United States, where there was a real, I think, hard line between those who worked in television and those who worked in film. And I think in the international community, which included England as well, there was more of a mix of opportunity, certainly for actors in all areas.
Yeah, I think too. Italy is about the size of California, so you've got a limited number of actors to choose from, unless you bring in British or German or Spanish, which they did in co-productions.
Sure.
Yep. The other thing is, most of these guys, if you read their bios, all started in the theater. So they could do dramatic roles, they could do comedy roles, they could do action roles. They had like you said, a basis to do everything, and they could appeal to all kinds of different directors on whatever the film was to be.
Absolutely. And of course, with the Germans, that was literally the reason for the presence of Klaus Kinski in these movies, and William Berger and people like that, because that was to accommodate the German money, which was so important to the production of these movies, including The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly.
Sure. Well, if you wanted to make a war movie and you wanted a German soldier, you went a couple of 100 miles away and got a real German to play the part. Yep, exactly. Okay, the other one we want to talk about is Who Are Those Guys? And it's Enzo Petito. Yeah, Enzo Petito was the gun shop owner. He was born in Vicenzo Squatriti, Italy, on July 24th, 1897. And he was the great-grandson of stage actor Antonio Petito, who was born in 1822 and died in 1876. He was an Italian film and stage character actor who began his career as a theater actor under Eduardo De Filippo in the 1950s in the Teatro San Fernando of Naples. Petito also appeared in several De Filippo's films, often co-starring with his brother Eduardo and another brother Peppino. The brothers are often considered to be amongst the greatest Italian actors of the 20th century. Petito played minor roles in some memorable Italian comedy movies directed by the likes of Dino Risi and Mario Monicelli in the late 1950s and early 1960s, often appearing alongside actors such as Nino Manfredi, Alberto Sordi, Anna Maria Ferrero, and Toto. Although never a leading actor, he made a number of small appearances as a character actor alongside Italy's leading film stars. His roles ranged from storekeepers and cobblers to priests and homeless men. His most esteemed role, however, is perhaps as Napoleon in Sergio Corbucci's comedy Chi si ferma è perduto, He Who Hesitates is Lost, in 1963, and is arguably best known for his last cinematic film role as the feeble, helpless storekeeper Milton in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. I don't know where the Milton name comes from because I don't think he says it or Tuco ever brings it up,
Yeah,
but that's what he
yeah.
is.
I don't think. Yeah, they never mention it.
And they got to put something in IMDb so that instead of gun shop owner, they give him Milton, unless that's in a Italian version or a Spanish version that we don't hear the name. But anyways, he's abused by the bandit Tuco, Eli Wallach, and robbed. Petito utters lines such as revolvers, Colt, Remington, Smith & Wesson, with a sad expression on his face. His expression of joy as he shakes his head no at Tuco, who seems to miss his last target when he tries out his newly assembled gun, only then looks astonished at the feat of the outlaw's marksmanship when Tuco jumps on a board and the head falls off. Tuco then asks how much, and Petito states $20. Tuco says again, laughing, how much, as he points his revolver at his head. Petito empties his cash register and says $200. It's all I've got. As Tuco leaves the gun shop, he mimics Petito to open his mouth and places the store's close sign in it as he departs as a gesture to keep quiet. I've read that Tuco came up with that as he left the store. It wasn't in the script. He just saw closed and called Petito over and shoved it in his mouth. And Sergio started laughing, so they kept it in the scene. Anyway, Enzo died less than a year later in Rome on July 17th, 1967. The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly is his only Western. Okay, I'm going to get into the CD of the week. CD of the week, and there's got to be dozens of Good, the Bad, and the Ugly versions out there. But this is the one I recommend. It came out in 2014. It's The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. It came out of Italy on the Retro Gold label because it has 39 tracks. Total listening time, and you better have time set aside, is 95 minutes and 20 seconds. It goes for $50, but if you want the complete version with little 5-second blips of harmonica music or twangs of a Jew's harp, whatever, that's the one to get. Okay, how about autograph of the week? Okay, and keeping with the theme of the week, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and I think I've shown this one before in the very beginning, but it's a picture of Eli Wallach and Sergio Leone going through the scene at the mission, and it's signed both by Eli and Sergio. And I got this from the Don Bruce collection. He gave it to me as a present. I think I mentioned before, Don and I would go on eBay and bid for Sergio Leone material, not knowing each other and not knowing what names we were using. And in doing so, we kept raising the prices against one another without knowing it. So once we found out, we gave up, and I'd let Don buy it, and then I would buy it from him, or he'd give it to me as a present, or vice versa. But that's the autograph of the week, Eli Wallach and Sergio Leone. Okay, how about the book of the week? Okay, the good, the bad, and the ugly. We've Book of the week. I've shown this one before, but if you really are fans of the good, the bad, and the ugly, you've got to get this book. It's behind the scenes of Sergio Leone's The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly by Joe Hanley. Came out in 2016 by El Buono Publishing, probably self-published. It's in English. It's 419 pages. It's almost too big to even open up and show you. Got plenty of pages. It covers everything you'd want to know. Hanley worked on this thing for, I got to say, 10 years. I mean, we bugged him every year, is the book done? Is the book done? Is the book done? And he kept getting more and more interviews and bits of information and dialogue and stuff like that. And it's well worth the wait. But if you want to get a book on the good, the bad, and the ugly, that's it. It rivals Frayling's Once Upon a Time in the West book. Okay, let's close up now with the weekly news. Okay, quickly before we get to that, the poster of the week is, this is the French poster. It's huge. I used it for the backdrop, but that's of the good, the bad, and the ugly. The other good one that they made was for a few dollars more, where they show the El Indio's gang, and you can actually see just in the shadows who each of the riders are, Pistilli, Brega, whatever. It's amazing. The Fistful of Dollars French version is a complete disappointment. It looks nothing like these two. Anyways, the weekly news. First thing we have is a German DVD release by Charlie Video on September 16th of Pulverdamp in Casa Grande, called in English Gunfighters of Casa Grande. It was directed by Roy Rowland, starred Alex Nichol, Jorge Mistral, Steve Rowland, Dick Bentley. The release is one disc. It's in widescreen. It's in Dolby Digital 2.0 German and English. Also, we have in the RIPs, we have two actors. First one is Jack Ging. American actor Jack Ging died in his Palm Springs, California home on September 10th. He was 90. Born on October 30th, 1931 in Alva, Oklahoma. Ging enjoyed a rather fruitful career as a television actor from the late 1950s to early 1990s before retiring in California with his wife Apache in 1994. During that time, he worked in over 100 productions, mostly for television, including many of the then Western genre television shows produced in the 60s. His success as a supporting character transferred to the big screen, and he became a minor player in the boom of Hollywood Westerns in the late 60s and early 70s, usually in supporting roles opposite Clint Eastwood. He was seen as Marshal Ace Hayes in 1968's Hingham High, as Morgan Allen in 73's High Plains Drifter, and his only European Western appearance was an uncredited role as the preacher in Another Man, Another Chance in 77, starring James Caan and Genevieve Bujold. And we just heard yesterday that Henry Silva passed away. Henry Silva died at the Actors Home in Woodland Hills, California on September 14th. It's the day before his 94th birthday. He was born in Brooklyn, New York on September 15th, 1928. He often played villains and had credits in hundreds of films, including Ocean's 11 and The Manchurian Candidate. Silva was a member, probably the last one, of Frank Sinatra's Rat Pack, and appeared with Frank in 1960's Ocean 11 with Dean Martin and Sammy Davis Jr., where he was one of the 11 Thieves, and again in 62 in the Western Sergeants 3. In later years, he appeared in Burt Reynolds' Sharky's Machine in 81, with Chuck Norris in Code of Silence in 85, Steven Seagal, Above the Law in 88. He was in Warren Beatty's Dick Tracy in 1990, and in Jim Jarmusch's Ghost Dog, The Way of the Samurai in 1999. Silva's final screen appearance was a cameo in the Ocean's 11 remake in 2001. Henry appeared in 3 Euro westerns, The Hills Run Red in 66 as Garcia Mendez, a must-see, White Fang to the Rescue in 74 as Mr. Nelson with Maurizio Merli, and 1984's Manhunt in 84 as Mr. Collins with Ethan Wayne. Okay, that concludes season 4. And I want to again thank Courtney Joyner for joining us and discussing the film. Anything you might want to add, Court?
Yeah, just real quick, Steve Carver and I did a special afternoon with Henry Silva, and of course he was included in our book Western Portraits. And I'll never walking into Henry's condominium there, and we started talking about Ocean's 11 because he had that famous picture of the entire cast around the roulette table there in his hallway, and he said, "I was not Joey Bishop." Well, I think what he meant by that was he did not have to curry favor with Frank Sinatra.
Yeah, right. He wasn't a gopher. Yeah.
No, he was not, and he was just his
Yep.
own man. And there you go. And for a little bit of minor Sergio Leone trivia, when Steve Carver was directing the movie Drum, he replaced Burt Kennedy,
Mm-hmm.
and he was going to go on location, and Dino De Laurentiis told him, "Look, we've got this large house for you, but you'll actually have somebody else who's going to be living there, if that's okay." And Steve said, "Sure, that's all right with me." And he arrives, and his roommate was Sergio Leone.
Oh, wow. Oh, yeah. That's how I got to meet him. Okay. Now I know.
Yep.
Okay.
And yes, and Leone was there trying to arrange financing for a project for Dino De Laurentiis, and Ralph
Right.
Serpi and all the De Laurentiis people were there on location. So Steve would be making Drum, and Sergio Leone would be creating these unbelievable dinners at the house. And as soon as they would wrap, everybody would go to the house and have, this Italian
Pasta.
feast practically every
Yep.
single night. Yep.
Amazing. Yeah, I knew that Steve knew Sergio because he sent me a copy of Clint's contract on Fistful of Dollars. And he had gotten it from Sergio. And poor Steve, I'm sorry he passed away. I'd love to sit down and talk to him for an hour about what he knew about Sergio and what type of guy he was and all kinds of stuff. Actually, having him as a roommate, unbelievable.
Yep.
Anyways, that wraps up season 4 for us. We're going to go on vacation for a while. We've got, I don't know how long. We'll toss it back and forth between Jay and myself on when we're going to come back and when, if, and how. But in the meantime, I want to thank everybody for joining us for these 100 episodes, bearing with us as we try to get better, and being fans of the podcast, having guests like Courtney join us, and all the other guests that bore up with the interviews that we gave them. Some of them were fantastic, and we really appreciate their joining us on them. In the meantime, this has been a Roberto Genesi production, and until we meet again, adios, amigos.